When did you realize your ex's generous settlement was actually worth millions? After 18 years of marriage, my husband Keith sat me down last February with divorce papers already signed by his lawyer. I need to focus on my career. You're holding me back. You knew this was coming. This was the man whose medical school loans I paid off, waiting tables at 3 different restaurants. The man whose residency I supported by working double shifts while pregnant. The man who became chief of surgery while I raised our kids alone, missing every recital, every game, every parent-teacher conference. His settlement offer was insulting. The house in Millbrook that his grandmother left him. A 1987 Ford pickup with 200,000 miles, and $800 a month in alimony for 2 years. That's it. Take it or leave it. But that house needs serious work. New roof, new plumbing, probably termites. The foundation's cracked. It's basically a teardown. You're lucky I'm giving you anything. My lawyer said fighting would cost more than I'd gain. Keith had hidden assets well and moved money around for months. His salary was officially reduced on paper. Keith was already with his 26-year-old surgical resident, posting pictures of their weekend trips to vineyards. I was 43 with no career because I'd spent 2 decades being his support system, his secretary, his therapist, his mother. I took the deal. The house was 3 hours from the city, in the middle of nowhere. Built in 1841, according to the crumbling foundation stones. 4 rooms, no insulation, wood stove heating, and mice in the walls. The realtor I called actually laughed. Maybe $60,000 if you're lucky, more likely $40,000 for the land once you demolish. That's generous, honestly. This place is a disaster. But I had nowhere else to go. My sister lived in California. My parents were gone. I moved in April, figuring I'd fix it up slowly and maybe get $80,000 eventually, enough to start over somewhere cheap. That's when I found the letters in the attic. Hundreds of them, tied with faded ribbon, hidden under the floorboards in an old leather trunk. All addressed to someone named Josiah Bellworth. The paper was yellow, fragile, but the ink was still readable. I Googled him. Nothing. But the return addresses were interesting. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, William Lloyd Garrison, Sojourner Truth, John Brown. My hands were physically shaking. I drove to the County Historical Society that afternoon. The historian, an elderly woman named Dorothy, went pale when I showed her one letter. This is Bellworth House? You actually own Bellworth House? We thought it was destroyed in the 1920s. Everyone thought it burned down. Josiah Bellworth ran the most important underground railroad station in the state. These letters are priceless. This changes everything we know about the network in this region. That night, I got a call from the State Historical Commission. They wanted to visit immediately. Then the National Park Service called. Then the Smithsonian. Then Yale University. Then the Museum of African American History. By May, I had 3 separate government agencies and 2 universities competing to buy the property. The state offered one, $2 million. The Park Service offered one, $8 million. The Smithsonian Partnership offered 2, $3 million plus consulting fees for the restoration. Yale offered $2 million plus a research position. Keith called me in June, super casual. Hey, just checking in. Heard you're doing some renovations on grandmother's place. How's that going? The neighbor mentioned seeing lots of cars there. Fine, just fine. Fixing things up. Actually, I've been thinking. That house has sentimental value. Maybe we should revisit the settlement. I could buy it back from you. Give you something nicer. Maybe a condo in the city? 2 bedrooms, a doorman, and much more practical for you. I played dumb. Oh, that's sweet. But I'm getting attached to country living. It's very peaceful here. 2 days later, his lawyer called. Dr. Haywood would like to offer you $200,000 for the Millbrook property. That's triple what it's worth. Very generous. You could buy something actually livable with that money. I declined. Keith called again, furious this time. That house belonged to my grandmother. It's family heritage. You're being spiteful. You have no right to keep it. Strange how it wasn't family heritage when you dumped it on me 6 months ago. The calls got desperate. $300,000. Then $400,000. Then $500,000. His new girlfriend started texting me. Please be reasonable. Keith's grandmother would want the house to stay in the family. He's really hurt by this. You're destroying his connection to his grandmother. Think about his feelings. I blocked her after she sent 15 messages in 1 hour. In July, Keith showed up at the house with his lawyer and a new offer. $1 million, cash, today. The lawyer had the papers ready, the check already written. Sign now and transfer the deed. We can have this done in an hour. We both know why you want this house, Keith. No idea what you mean. The house just has sentimental value. Your cousin told me, the one who works at the Historical Commission. He called you about the letters in March, before you filed for divorce. You knew exactly what you were giving me. Keith's face went red, then purple. His jaw worked like he was trying to swallow something sharp. The lawyer beside him cleared his throat and shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. Keith had brought them both here expecting me to fold the way I always had when he wanted something. He used to give me that look during our marriage, the one that said I was being difficult and I'd back down every time. Not anymore. Keith straightened his shoulders and put on what I called his doctor face, the calm professional expression he used with patience. His grandmother specifically wanted this house to stay in the family. She told me that before she died. You're dishonoring her memory by being difficult about this whole situation. We can work this out reasonably if you just stop being so stubborn. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. Your grandmother left the house to you, not me. You're the one who dumped it on me in the divorce settlement. You stood in your lawyer's office and called it a worthless teardown with termites and a cracked foundation. You said I was lucky you were giving me anything at all. Remember that conversation, Keith? Because I remember every single word. The lawyer jumped in before Keith could respond. Mrs. Haywood, we're here in good faith to reach a reasonable settlement. The property has sentimental value to Dr. Haywood's family, and we believe a fair negotiation can benefit everyone involved. We're prepared to offer very generous terms for the property transfer. I watched Keith's face while his lawyer talked. His left eye was twitching the way it always did when he was stressed. His hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. He knew I'd figured it out, and the panic was starting to show through the professional mask. This wasn't about his grandmother or family heritage. This was about millions of dollars he'd tried to steal from me by hiding the truth. They left 20 minutes later with nothing. Keith tried 3 more times to change my mind before his lawyer finally steered him toward the car. I watched them drive away, then went inside and found the business card Dorothy had given me 2 weeks ago. The divorce attorney she'd recommended when I first told her about Keith's sudden interest in buying back the property. I called the number and a woman answered on the second ring. Iris Elliott speaking. I explained the whole situation, starting with the divorce settlement and ending with Keith's $1 million cash offer that afternoon. I told her about finding the letters, the institutions competing to buy the property, and Keith's cousin at the Historical Commission who must have tipped him off. The words came out in a rush. 18 years of supporting Keith's career, and 6 months of watching him try to cheat me out of everything. Iris went completely silent for almost 30 seconds. I thought maybe the call had dropped until she finally spoke. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of divorce fraud I've ever heard. Your ex-husband deliberately concealed the property's true value during your divorce proceedings. That's illegal. That's grounds to reopen the entire settlement and potentially press criminal charges. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the front porch steps because my legs suddenly felt weak. Can we actually do that? Can we reopen the divorce? Iris's voice was steady and professional. We can absolutely do that. But I need you to understand what you're getting into here. Keith will throw everything he has at this to avoid fraud charges and losing his medical license. This won't be quick or easy. Are you ready for a real fight? I thought about the past 18 years. Working 3 waitressing jobs to pay off Keith's medical school loans, working double shifts while pregnant because he needed to focus on his residency, raising our kids alone while he built his career, missing every moment of their childhood because Keith's work always came first, taking care of everything at home so he could become chief of surgery, and then getting handed divorce papers with a settlement designed to leave me with nothing. I spent 18 years fighting Keith's battles while he built his career. I'm ready to fight one for myself now. Iris made a satisfied sound. Good. I'll take your case. I need you to gather every piece of documentation from the divorce proceedings. The property assessment, Keith's financial disclosures, all communication about the settlement. Can you get me those documents by tomorrow? I told her I could. She said she'd start requesting the official records from the court and Keith's lawyer. We talked for another 20 minutes about strategy and what to expect. By the time I hung up, the sun was setting behind the old house and I felt more awake than I had in months. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sorting through boxes of divorce paperwork in the attic. Keith's name showed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but then I remembered Iris's instructions about recording everything. I hit record on my phone and answered. Hey. Keith's voice was warm and gentle, the tone he used when he wanted something. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. We're both being unreasonable about this whole situation. Why don't we talk this through like adults? We could have dinner, just the 2 of us, the way we used to solve problems. No lawyers, no pressure. Just 2 people who used to care about each other working things out. The recording app showed the timer ticking up. I kept my voice neutral. All communication needs to go through our lawyers now, Keith. That's how this works. The warmth disappeared from his voice instantly. You're making a huge mistake. You have no idea what you're getting into here. My legal team will bury you in paperwork and fees. You'll spend everything you have just fighting me and you'll still lose. Take the settlement offer while it's still on the table. I hung up and sent the recording to Iris immediately. She called back 5 minutes later and said it was perfect. Keith threatening me outside of legal channels was exactly the kind of thing that would look bad in court. Iris filed the motion to reopen the divorce settlement 3 days later. The filing was 30 pages long and included everything. Keith's cousin's employment at the Historical Commission. The timeline of when Keith knew about the letters versus when he pushed through the divorce. The property's current appraised value compared to what Keith claimed it was worth. Documentation of every offer Keith had made to buy back the property. The recording of Keith's threatening phone call. Keith's lawyer filed an emergency response motion the next morning. I read it in Iris's office while she made notes on a legal pad. Their argument was that the house was always intended as family property, that the divorce settlement was fair based on the structure's condition, and that any increased value came from my discovery of the letters, not from Keith's prior knowledge. Iris circled 3 sections of their filing and looked up at me. This is weak. They're trying to separate the property value from the historical significance, but those 2 things are inseparable. The house is valuable because of its history. Keith knew about the history before the divorce. Therefore, he knew about the value. It's simple logic. Can we prove he knew? I mean, really prove it in court? Iris tapped her pen on the legal pad. We need the emails between Keith and his cousin, the ones where they discuss the letters and the Historical Commission's interest. Your ex's cousin works for a government agency, which means those emails are potentially subject to public records requests. But it would be faster if he just handed them over voluntarily. She picked up her phone and made a call. I listened to her explain the situation to someone, her voice professional but firm. She mentioned subpoenas and public records laws and the cousin's professional reputation. When she hung up, she looked satisfied. He'll provide the emails by end of business tomorrow. He doesn't want to get dragged into this mess. The emails arrived as promised. Iris and I spent an entire afternoon going through them in her office. The first one was dated March 15th, 2 months before my divorce was finalized in May. Keith's cousin had sent him a message about a property inquiry the Historical Commission had received regarding old houses in the Millbrook area, specifically properties with connections to the Underground Railroad. Keith's response was careful, but clear. He asked if the commission had any information about his grandmother's old house on Belworth Road. His cousin wrote back 3 days later with details about Josiah Belworth and the significance of the property. The emails continued for weeks, with Keith asking questions about property values and historical designations, and whether the commission planned to pursue acquisition. The last email was dated April 28th, 5 days before Keith handed me the divorce papers. His cousin wrote that the commission was definitely interested in the Belworth property, and would likely make an offer once they completed their research. Keith's response was just 2 words. Good to know. Iris made copies of everything and added them to our case file. This is exactly what we needed. Keith knew the property was historically significant in March. He knew institutions would want to buy it. And he deliberately gave it to you in the settlement while claiming it was worthless. That's fraud. Clear, documented, provable fraud. The court filing landed like a bomb. Within 24 hours, my phone started ringing off the hook. First up was Clifford from the National Park Service. He had that careful government voice, polite but direct. He asked about my timeline for deciding on their offer. I explained the whole mess with Keith and the fraud case. Clifford barely paused before saying they'd dealt with property disputes before and could wait for things to shake out. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. Other institutions might not be as patient. They had budgets and deadlines. If I took too long, some of these offers might disappear. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the pressure ratchet up another notch. 2 days later, Valerie from the Smithsonian called. She got straight to business. The partnership was revising their offer to $2. $5 million plus a 5-year consulting contract worth $150,000 annually. I did the math in my head. That was $3. $25 million total. She said they were very motivated to lock this down before a competitor institution swooped in. The way she said competitor made it clear this wasn't just about history anymore. These organizations were in a bidding war, and I was sitting on the prize. Keith's girlfriend must have been watching my social media like a hawk, because the next thing I knew, she launched a full campaign against me. She posted old photos of Keith with his grandmother at Belworth House, pictures I'd never even seen during our marriage. The captions painted me as a gold digger trying to steal Keith's family heritage. She wrote these long, emotional posts about how I never cared about the property until it was worth money. How I was destroying Keith's connection to his grandmother's memory. How I was being cruel and spiteful. The posts got shared in medical community groups, local community pages, everywhere. For about 36 hours, I watched my name get dragged through the mud by people who didn't know me and didn't care about the truth. Then the tide turned. Keith's former colleagues started commenting. One surgeon wrote about how Keith used to complain constantly about the worthless dump his grandmother stuck him with. Another shared a story about Keith trying to sell the property for scrap value years ago. A nurse mentioned hearing Keith say he wished the house would just burn down, so he could collect insurance. Every comment included screenshots of old texts and emails where Keith had trash-talked the property. His girlfriend's campaign backfired spectacularly. Iris called me that afternoon, barely containing her excitement. She'd been screenshotting everything, building a file that showed Keith's true feelings about the house before he knew its value. This was gold for our case. The following Monday, I drove to Iris's office to meet with the forensic accountant she'd hired. Cody Rivers looked exactly like you'd expect a forensic accountant to look. Quiet, methodical, dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than my truck. He spread Keith's financial disclosures across the conference table and spent 3 solid hours going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. I tried to follow along, but the numbers blurred together after a while. Finally, Cody looked up and spoke for the first time since we'd started. Keith's financial picture had more holes than Swiss cheese. That was his exact phrase, delivered completely deadpan. Cody walked me through it step by step. Keith claimed his salary got reduced right before our divorce. The hospital records told a different story. Keith actually received a huge raise 6 months before he filed the papers. The reduction was only on paper, a creative accounting trick. The difference between his real salary and his claimed salary went into accounts he never told me about. Accounts that never appeared in any divorce filing. Cody estimated Keith had been siphoning money for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Every month moving chunks of cash into hidden places while I balanced our household budget and wondered why we always seemed broke despite his big surgeon salary. The really bad part came next. Cody found 3 separate investment accounts Keith opened during our marriage, all in Keith's name only, all funded with money that should have been marital property. The accounts held stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Cody added up the totals. Over $400,000 that should have been split 50-50 in the divorce. Money Keith hid while claiming he couldn't afford better alimony. Money he protected while giving me a crumbling house and a truck with 200,000 miles. Iris filed an amended motion that same week. This time, the filing included everything. The hidden accounts, the fake salary reduction, the systematic financial deception spanning years. She explained this changed our entire strategy. We weren't just fighting over one undervalued property anymore. We were documenting a pattern of deliberate fraud throughout the divorce. Keith hadn't just lied about the house, he'd lied about everything. 3 days after the amended filing, Keith showed up at Belworth House without warning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his car in the driveway. My heart started pounding before I even looked out the window. There he was, climbing out of his BMW like he owned the place. He walked up to the porch and knocked. I didn't move. He knocked again, harder. Then he started talking through the door. He said he just wanted to walk through his grandmother's home one last time. That he had memories here. That I was being unreasonable. When I still didn't answer, his voice changed. He started yelling, saying I'd changed, become someone he didn't recognize, that I never used to be this cold and calculating, that the woman he married would have been kind about this. I walked to the door but kept it locked. I told Keith through the wood that I learned from the best teacher, that this was my property now, legally mine, and he needed to leave before I called the police. My voice shook, but I got the words out. Keith went silent for a minute. Then he walked back to his car. But he didn't drive away. He just sat there at the end of the driveway, engine off, staring at the house. I watched him through the window for 20 minutes before he finally started the car and left. My hands were still shaking an hour later. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. The caller ID showed the county sheriff's office. My stomach dropped. I answered, and a man introduced himself as Sheriff Brennan, his voice careful and professional. He said Keith filed a complaint yesterday claiming I was blocking him from accessing his family property. The sheriff cleared his throat and explained he had to follow up on any complaint filed, but he wanted me to know this looked like a civil matter, not criminal. He asked if Keith had tried to enter the property, and I'd prevented him. I told the sheriff about Keith showing up without warning, demanding to walk through the house and sitting in his car at the end of my driveway for 20 minutes after I refused. The sheriff made a note and said that was helpful information. He advised me to document any future contact and suggested I might want to talk to my lawyer about a restraining order if Keith kept showing up unannounced. I thanked him and hung up, then immediately called Iris to tell her about the sheriff's visit and his complaint. She wasn't surprised and said this was typical Keith, trying to use every avenue to pressure me. She added the complaint to our file as more evidence of his harassment. 3 days later, Dorothy called from the Historical Society. Her voice bubbled with excitement as she asked if I'd be willing to speak at a regional preservation conference in 2 weeks. The conference focused on Underground Railroad sites, and the Bellworth discovery was exactly the kind of story they wanted to feature. I felt my chest tighten at the thought of standing in front of a room full of historians and experts. I told Dorothy I'd never done public speaking and wasn't sure I was the right person for this. She insisted my story needed to be told, not just the historical discovery, but also the fight to preserve the property from Keith's attempts to reclaim it. She said the preservation community needed to hear about threats to historical sites from private interests. I asked if she really thought my divorce drama belonged at an academic conference. Dorothy laughed and said property disputes were part of preservation work, and my situation highlighted why legal protections for historical sites mattered. I finally agreed, my voice shaking slightly, and Dorothy promised to help me prepare my talk. The conference took place at a university 2 hours away. I drove there on a Saturday morning, my prepared notes sitting on the passenger seat. Dorothy met me in the lobby and walked me through the schedule. My talk was scheduled for early afternoon in a medium-sized room. When the time came, I stood at the podium looking out at maybe 60 people, historians and preservationists and university professors. I started by explaining how I found the letters in the attic, how Dorothy identified their significance, and how the discovery changed everything I knew about the property. Then I talked about Keith giving me the house in our divorce settlement while calling it worthless, and how he tried to buy it back once he learned about the letters. The room went completely silent. When I finished, hands shot up immediately. A woman in the front row asked if Keith knew about the historical value before the divorce was finalized. I said yes. His cousin at the Historical Commission told him in March, 2 months before our divorce. A man near the back stood up and said what Keith did was fraud, plain and simple, and he'd be happy to serve as an expert witness about the property's historical significance and value. Several other people nodded and offered the same. A professor from a state university said she specialized in property law and preservation cases, and she'd provide testimony about how Keith deliberately concealed material information during divorce proceedings. I wrote down names and contact information, overwhelmed by the support from people I'd just met. After my talk, a woman approached me near the refreshment table. She introduced herself as a journalist for a history magazine that covered preservation issues and significant historical discoveries. She said she wanted to write a feature story about the Bellworth letters and the legal battle surrounding the property. She asked if I'd be willing to do an interview, maybe let her photographer take pictures of the house and some of the letters. I told her I'd need to check with my lawyer first. She handed me her business card and said to call her whenever I was ready, that this story deserved to be told widely. I thanked her and put the card in my pocket. That evening, I called Iris and told her about the journalist's request. Iris was quiet for a moment, then said we should wait until after the court hearing to do any press interviews. She explained that anything I said publicly could be used against me in court, and Keith's lawyer would absolutely twist my words to make me look bad. She promised that once the hearing was over, I could do all the interviews I wanted. On Monday morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address showed Keith's lawyer's office. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter threatened to sue me for defamation if I continued spreading false narratives about Keith's knowledge of the property value. It claimed I was damaging Keith's professional reputation by making baseless accusations of fraud and deception. The letter demanded I immediately stop making public statements about the divorce proceedings and the property dispute. I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Iris. She called me back within an hour, her voice sharp with anger. She said Keith's lawyer was bluffing, trying to scare me into silence. Iris explained that truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims, and we had documentation proving every single thing I'd said about Keith's knowledge and actions. She said she'd send a response letter making it clear we weren't backing down, and we had evidence to support all our claims. She also said this threat letter was actually helpful, because it showed Keith was getting desperate and worried about public opinion. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside were printed screenshots of my social media posts from the past month. Someone had been monitoring my online activity, saving posts about the house renovation, the historical society visits, and general updates about my life. Nothing sensitive or private, but the fact that someone was tracking me this closely made my skin crawl. I called Iris immediately, and she said to save the envelope and screenshots as evidence of harassment. She asked if I'd posted anything about the legal case on social media. I said no, I'd been careful about that. She advised me to make all my accounts private and to stop posting anything related to the property or the divorce. I spent that evening going through all my social media settings, making everything private and blocking Keith, his girlfriend, and anyone I thought might be feeding them information. The whole situation felt increasingly creepy and invasive. The next morning, Valerie from the Smithsonian called. She said their legal team had reviewed the divorce fraud case and the ongoing litigation. I held my breath, expecting her to say they were pulling their offer. Instead, Valerie said they were still fully committed to the partnership regardless of the outcome. She explained that institutions deal with complicated property histories all the time, and this situation wouldn't affect their offer or their plans for the site. She said the Smithsonian had lawyers who specialized in property acquisitions with legal complications, and they were prepared to work through whatever challenges came up. I felt relief flood through me. I'd been worried that Keith's legal tactics would scare away the institutions interested in the property. Valerie said to keep them updated on the timeline, but they were patient and understood these things took time to resolve properly. That afternoon, Iris called with a court date. The hearing to reopen the divorce settlement was scheduled for late August, about 6 weeks away. She said we needed to prepare thoroughly because Keith's lawyer would try to paint me as vindictive and opportunistic, rather than focusing on Keith's deception. She explained their strategy would be to claim I was just angry about the divorce and trying to punish Keith by refusing to let go of his grandmother's house. They'd argue I was taking advantage of a lucky discovery to hurt him financially and professionally. Iris said we needed to stay focused on the facts, the timeline, and the documented evidence of Keith's knowledge and deception. She scheduled several prep sessions over the next few weeks to go over my testimony and practice handling hostile questions from Keith's lawyer. The same week, Keith's girlfriend posted a long essay on social media about the challenges of dating a man going through a difficult divorce. She didn't name me directly, but the details made it obvious who she meant. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. She wrote about manipulative ex-wives who can't accept that their marriages are over, who use children and property as weapons, who make everything harder out of spite. She described how hard Keith worked, how dedicated he was to his patients, how much he'd sacrificed in his marriage. The post painted me as the villain in their love story. I didn't respond or engage, but other people did. The comment section filled up fast. Multiple people pointed out that she started dating Keith while he was still married, that she was the other woman, not some innocent victim. Someone dug up the timeline and posted that Keith filed for divorce right after starting his relationship with her. Others called her out for posting about private legal matters publicly. The essay backfired completely, making both her and Keith look worse instead of generating sympathy. For the next week, I met with Iris almost daily to prepare my testimony. We went over every detail of my marriage to Keith, from paying his medical school loans to supporting him through residency, to raising our kids alone while he built his career. We reviewed the divorce proceedings, Keith's settlement offer, his specific language about the house being worthless and needing to be demolished. We practiced my answers about finding the letters, discovering their significance, and Keith's subsequent attempts to reclaim the property. Iris coached me to stay calm and factual no matter what Keith's lawyer said to me. She warned me he'd try to make me angry or defensive, try to get me to say something emotional that would make me look unstable or vindictive. She had me practice responding to hostile questions with simple, direct answers focused on facts and timeline. She reminded me repeatedly that we had the evidence on our side, that Keith's own emails and financial records would tell the story even if my testimony wasn't perfect. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. with a text from Keith. It didn't have to be like this. Just those 6 words. No explanation, no context. I stared at the message for a full minute before screenshotting it and forwarding it to Iris with a note about the timestamp. She replied within 3 minutes even though it was almost midnight. Perfect. This shows him trying to contact you outside legal channels right before the hearing. Judge won't like it. I couldn't sleep after that, lying in bed replaying every conversation we'd had during the divorce, every lie he'd told about the house being worthless. My alarm went off at 6, but I'd been awake since 4, watching the ceiling fan spin in circles. The courthouse parking lot was already half full when I arrived at 8:30 for the 9 o'clock hearing. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, before finally forcing myself to walk toward the entrance. Keith was standing in the lobby with his girlfriend when I came through security. He looked absolutely terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His face was pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled like he'd pulled it straight from the laundry basket. The girlfriend wore a navy blue dress suit that belonged at a wedding, not a courthouse, way too formal and fancy for the occasion. She glared at me across the marble lobby, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Keith wouldn't look at me directly, just stared at the floor tiles while his lawyer talked to him in a low voice. Iris appeared beside me and guided me toward the courtroom, her hand firm on my elbow. Don't engage with them. Don't even look their direction. We walked past Keith and his girlfriend without a word, but I felt his eyes follow me the whole way. Inside the courtroom, Keith's lawyer stood up first when the judge called the case. He was older, probably 60, with gray hair slicked back and an expensive watch. The property was fairly valued based on its condition at the time of divorce. My client's ex-wife got lucky with a historical discovery, but that doesn't mean the original settlement was unfair. Any increase in value is due to her discovery, not my client's prior knowledge. He held up the original property assessment showing the house needed major repairs. The emails between Dr. Haywood and his cousin were just casual family conversation, nothing more. Two family members discussing local history doesn't constitute evidence of deliberate deception. He went on for 15 minutes, making Keith sound like a generous man who gave his ex-wife property out of kindness, only to have her turn around and accuse him of fraud when she got lucky. Iris stood up next, and I watched her transform from the friendly woman who'd coached me through testimony prep into something sharp and precise. She pulled out a timeline printed on poster board and set it on an easel facing the judge. March 15th, Dr. Haywood's cousin at the Historical Commission contacts him about properties in the Millbrook region with potential Underground Railroad connections. March 22nd, Dr. Haywood begins moving assets into undisclosed accounts. April 3rd, Dr. Haywood files for divorce. May 1st, divorce is finalized with the Millbrook property going to my client. May 8th, my client discovers the Bellworth letters. She walked the judge through each date, showing Keith's sudden urgency to finalize the divorce right after his cousin's call. His failure to disclose the Historical Commission's interest in properties in that specific region. His deliberate misrepresentation of the property as a teardown. She had copies of the emails between Keith and his cousin, with certain phrases highlighted in yellow. This property could be significant. You should look into it before you do anything with it. Keith's response. Thanks for the heads up. I'll handle it. Iris let those words hang in the air for a moment before sitting down. The judge called me to testify next, and my legs felt shaky walking to the witness stand. Iris asked me to describe Keith's specific language during the settlement negotiations. I took a breath and focused on the facts like we'd practiced. He told me the house was basically a teardown, that it needed a new roof, new plumbing, probably had termites. He said the foundation was cracked, and I was lucky he was giving me anything. He pushed me to take the house instead of other assets, said it was more than I deserved after holding him back all those years. The judge wrote notes the entire time I talked, her pen moving fast across the legal pad. Iris asked about Keith's behavior after I discovered the letters. He called offering to buy the property back, starting at $200,000 and going up to $1 million. He showed up at my house with his lawyer and a check already written. He said the house had sentimental value, but during the divorce he called it a worthless dump his grandmother had stuck him with. The judge kept writing, occasionally looking up at me with an expression I couldn't read. Keith took the stand after me, and his lawyer had him tell the story about his grandmother, how much the house meant to their family. My grandmother raised me in that house during summers. It has deep sentimental value that goes beyond money. I just wanted to keep it in the family. His voice cracked a little, playing the emotional card. But then Iris stood up for cross-examination and everything fell apart. When exactly did you learn about the historical significance of the property? Keith hesitated. After the divorce was final. When my ex-wife discovered the letters. Iris pulled out the emails with his cousin. So your cousin didn't mention anything about Underground Railroad properties in March? Keith's face flushed red. That was just general conversation. We talk about history sometimes. But you responded saying you'd handle it, correct? What did you mean by that? Keith stammered, contradicting himself. I meant I'd look into the property history. Or maybe I meant I'd take care of the house repairs. I don't remember exactly. Iris kept pushing, asking about specific dates, specific conversations, and Keith kept changing his answers, digging himself deeper with each response. Cody took the stand after the lunch break and methodically destroyed what was left of Keith's credibility. He presented bank statements showing Keith opened 3 separate investment accounts in the 2 years before filing for divorce. Documentation of Keith's actual salary versus what he claimed in divorce filings. Evidence of systematic asset concealment totaling over $400,000. Cody spoke in a calm, factual tone, just laying out numbers and dates, but the impact was devastating. Keith's lawyer tried to object, tried to claim the financial information wasn't relevant to the property dispute, but the judge overruled him. This goes to the pattern of deception alleged in the motion. I'll allow it. Cody continued for another 30 minutes, showing how Keith had deliberately hidden money while claiming reduced income. Keith's lawyer had no questions for Cody, just sat there looking defeated while his client's entire financial scheme got exposed in open court. The judge didn't rule immediately, which Iris had warned me might happen. I'm deeply troubled by the evidence I've heard today regarding financial deception and misrepresentation of assets. I need time to review all the documentation and testimony before making a ruling. I'll issue a written decision within 2 weeks. She looked directly at Keith. I'm warning both parties against any contact outside of proper legal channels while I deliberate on this matter. Any violations will be taken very seriously. Keith stared at the table in front of him, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. The judge gathered her papers and left the courtroom, and I felt like I could finally breathe again after holding my breath for hours. Outside the courtroom, Iris walked with me toward the exit. That went as well as we could have hoped. The judge's comments about being deeply troubled, that's good for us. She sees through his story. I felt cautiously hopeful but completely drained from spending 6 hours reliving the worst period of my life. Every detail of our marriage, every lie Keith told, every manipulation laid out for strangers to judge. Iris squeezed my shoulder. Go home, rest. We'll hear from the judge in the next 2 weeks. Try not to worry too much. I nodded, but worry was all I could feel, mixed with exhaustion and a strange sense of accomplishment that I'd finally stood up to Keith in a way that mattered. I was walking toward my car in the parking garage when Keith's girlfriend appeared from behind a concrete pillar. You're ruining his life over money. That property should rightfully be his. He's worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and you're destroying his career, his reputation, everything he built. She stepped closer, her voice getting louder. All because you can't accept that your marriage is over. You're pathetic. I walked past her without saying a word, keeping my eyes forward, my purse clutched tight against my side. She followed me for a few steps, still talking, still accusing, but I just kept walking. My hands were shaking so badly when I reached my car that I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. I sat in the driver's seat with the door locked, watching her storm back toward the courthouse entrance, and realized my whole body was trembling from adrenaline and anger and relief that the hearing was finally over. I drove back to Belworth House in a daze, my mind replaying the confrontation in the parking garage over and over. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Iris telling me to check my email immediately. The hospital where Keith worked had sent a formal notification that they'd received copies of the court filings and were opening an ethics investigation. Keith was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of their review into his financial disclosures and professional conduct. Someone had sent the hospital board every single document from our hearing, all the evidence about his hidden accounts and false salary claims, all the proof of his fraud laid out in official court records. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the email, my coffee getting cold in my hands. Keith had spent years building his reputation as chief of surgery, collecting awards and speaking at conferences, and now the hospital board was questioning whether he'd lied on his employment disclosures too. 2 days of silence followed, and I almost convinced myself Keith would handle this through his lawyer like the judge ordered. Then my phone rang at 7 a.m. with Keith's name on the screen. I answered and immediately regretted it because he was screaming, so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He called me every horrible name he could think of, said I'd destroyed his career and his reputation, that I was a vindictive witch who couldn't stand to see him happy with someone else. He said I'd sent those documents to the hospital myself just to hurt him, that I was trying to ruin his entire life because I was bitter about the divorce. I hung up without saying a word and immediately called Iris, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. She answered on the first ring and listened while I explained the call, then told me she was reporting the contact to the court as a direct violation of the judge's order. Keith wasn't supposed to contact me at all while the judge deliberated, and calling to scream threats definitely qualified as improper contact. Iris said the violation wouldn't help Keith's case and might actually push the judge toward a harsher ruling. 8 days after the hearing, a thick envelope arrived from the court with the judge's written decision. I sat on my porch steps and opened it with trembling fingers, reading through pages of legal language until I got to the conclusion. The judge found that Keith had committed fraud through material misrepresentation of assets and deliberate concealment of the property's true value. She wrote that the evidence clearly showed Keith knew about the historical significance before filing for divorce and had systematically hidden this information to cheat me out of my fair share of marital assets. The original divorce settlement was void, completely thrown out like it never existed. The judge ordered a complete reassessment of all marital assets with full financial disclosure from both sides, essentially starting the entire divorce process over with accurate information this time. I called Iris immediately, and she explained what the ruling meant in practical terms. We'd be going through property division again, splitting assets based on their real values instead of the fake numbers Keith had provided. This could take months to fully resolve because Keith's lawyer would probably appeal, and we'd need to track down every account and investment. But I was now in a much stronger position because Keith had been caught lying under oath, and the court knew he'd tried to steal millions from me. His credibility was destroyed and mine was solid. 3 days later, Keith's lawyer filed an appeal just like Iris predicted. She said appeals rarely succeeded in fraud cases with this much documentation, especially when the judge had been so clear about finding deliberate deception. The appeal would drag things out for a while, but she felt confident the ruling would stand. I spent the next week meeting with all 4 institutions that had made offers on Belworth House, explaining the legal situation and the updated timeline. The State Historical Commission representative looked disappointed but said they understood. The Park Service director seemed frustrated but professional. Yale's representative started talking about other properties they were considering. But Valerie from the Smithsonian Partnership just nodded and said they'd dealt with complicated property disputes before. She asked how long I thought the legal process would take, and I told her honestly that I didn't know. Maybe months or even a year if Keith kept fighting. Valerie said the Smithsonian was willing to put their offer in writing with a clause making the purchase contingent on resolution of the legal dispute. This would give me leverage in the divorce renegotiation because Keith would see exactly what he'd lost. A formal offer for $2.5 million that he could have shared if he'd been honest from the start. I signed the contingent offer letter in Valerie's office that afternoon, and she gave me copies to provide to my lawyer. The new divorce negotiations began in early September, with both sides required to provide complete financial disclosure. Keith's lawyer showed up with boxes of documents, bank statements, and investment records and tax returns that should have been provided during our original divorce. Cody spent 2 weeks going through everything, creating spreadsheets that showed exactly where Keith had hidden money and how much he actually earned. The numbers were staggering when laid out honestly. Keith owed me half of the hidden accounts, over $200,000 that should have been split during the divorce. He owed me compensation for deliberately undervaluing Bellworth House, which was now worth at least $2 million based on institutional offers. His lawyer knew they had zero leverage because the judge had already ruled that Keith committed fraud. In mid-September, Keith's lawyer called Iris with a settlement offer. Keith would pay me $1.8 million total, giving up all claims to Bellworth House forever, and splitting the hidden accounts 50-50 like he should have done originally. Iris said it was a strong offer that would avoid years of appeals and litigation, that fighting for more might cost me time and legal fees without guaranteeing a better outcome. I thought about it for 2 days, running the numbers and imagining different scenarios. The money would give me financial security I'd never had before, enough to start over completely and build whatever life I wanted. But I needed one more thing that money couldn't buy. I told Iris I'd accept the settlement with one condition added. Keith had to sign a statement acknowledging his fraud, admitting he deliberately concealed the property's value and hid marital assets during our divorce. And he had to agree in writing to never contact me again outside of absolute legal necessity. His lawyer called back within an hour, saying Keith refused to sign any statement that admitted wrongdoing. Iris calmly explained that we'd see him in court then, and the appeal process would keep his ethics investigation open at the hospital for at least another year. 20 minutes later, the lawyer called back and said Keith agreed to both conditions. He'd signed the acknowledgement and the no-contact agreement, probably because his medical career couldn't survive another year of investigation and bad publicity. We finalized the settlement agreement on a cold morning in late September, meeting in a conference room with both lawyers present. Keith looked terrible, like he'd aged 5 years and 6 months. He signed every page without looking at me once, his pen scratching across the acknowledgement of fraud with visible anger in every stroke. When he finished, he stood up and walked out without a word, and I realized I'd probably never see him again. The feeling was overwhelming relief mixed with something that felt like freedom. The hospital board's decision came through 3 weeks later in a formal letter that Keith's lawyer forwarded to Iris. Keith would keep his position as chief of surgery, but faced mandatory ethics training and 2 years of probation, where any financial irregularities would result in immediate termination. The letter outlined specific violations related to his divorce disclosures and the deliberate misrepresentation of assets during legal proceedings. His colleagues would know about the probation, the training requirements, the ethics violations that led to this outcome. I read the letter twice and felt nothing except mild satisfaction that his actions finally caught up with him in a way that actually mattered. The Smithsonian paperwork took another month to finalize because their legal department wanted every detail documented and verified. Valerie walked me through page after page of contracts, preservation agreements, consulting terms, and payment schedules. The sale price landed at $2.5 million with the consulting contract starting immediately at $30,000 annually for 5 years. I signed everything in Valerie's office while Dorothy sat beside me as a witness, both of us grinning like idiots because this actually happened. The wire transfer hit my account 2 days later, and I stared at the balance for 10 minutes straight, unable to process that this money was real and mine. Dorothy called me the following week asking if I wanted to help catalog the letters as part of my consulting work. We met at the Historical Society where she'd set up a proper archival workspace with climate-controlled storage and white cotton gloves for handling the documents. Each letter needed careful documentation, photographing, transcription, and cross-referencing with known Underground Railroad records. The work required patience and attention to detail that reminded me of the nursing prerequisites I'd taken before Keith convinced me to drop out and support his career instead. Dorothy explained the historical significance of each correspondent, the coded language they used, the networks they built to move people north to freedom. I found myself arriving early and staying late, absorbed in these voices from the past who risked everything to help others. Dorothy mentioned during one of our sessions that she'd heard through her network at the hospital that Keith's girlfriend had ended things. Apparently, the surgical resident decided that dating a man under ethics investigation with serious financial problems wasn't the career move she'd imagined when she started seeing the successful chief of surgery. Keith was back to eating lunch alone in his office, according to Dorothy's source. No more weekend vineyard trips posted on social media. No more young girlfriend making him feel important and desired. I felt nothing hearing this news except mild curiosity about whether Keith finally understood what it felt like to be discarded when you stopped being useful. I started house hunting in October using part of the settlement money for a down payment. The real estate agent showed me a small ranch house 15 minutes from the Historical Society, far enough from the city that I'd never accidentally run into Keith at a restaurant or grocery store. The house had 3 bedrooms, updated kitchen and bathrooms, central heating and air conditioning, and a fenced backyard with actual grass instead of mud and mice. Everything worked properly without needing repairs or renovations or emergency fixes. I made an offer that afternoon and closed 3 weeks later, moving in with furniture I picked out myself instead of hand-me-downs from Keith's family or cheap pieces we'd bought together decades ago. The Smithsonian scheduled a press conference for mid-November to announce the acquisition and unveil some of the letters to the public. Valerie asked me to attend as a consulting historian and answer questions about the discovery process. I bought a professional outfit that actually fit properly and practiced talking points with Dorothy until I felt confident I wouldn't freeze up in front of cameras. The conference took place at a museum in the city with reporters from history publications, local news stations, and preservation organizations. I stood next to Valerie while she explained the significance of the find, then answered questions about discovering the letters and recognizing their importance. The journalist from the history magazine who'd approached me months ago asked about the legal battle to preserve the property, and I told the whole story without naming Keith directly, but making it clear someone had tried to reclaim the house after learning its true value. Universities started reaching out in December with research positions and graduate program opportunities. Yale offered a position in their preservation department with full benefits and tuition remission for doctoral studies. 2 state universities contacted me about their public history programs and seemed excited about my access to the letters for thesis research. I was 43 years old, sitting at my kitchen table reading emails from professors who wanted to work with me, something I'd never imagined possible during my marriage when every decision revolved around Keith's career and convenience. Going back to the school felt terrifying and exciting in equal measure, a chance to build something that was entirely mine. Keith's lawyer sent a final email in late December with an attached document. The settlement agreement required Keith to provide a formal written apology acknowledging his actions during our divorce. I opened the attachment and read 3 paragraphs of legal language expressing regret for any misunderstandings or miscommunications that occurred during our separation. The apology was clearly drafted by his attorney with no genuine remorse or personal accountability, just careful wording designed to fulfill a legal obligation without admitting real wrongdoing. I saved the document to a folder and closed my laptop without responding, because Keith's apology meant nothing compared to the life I was building without him. I enrolled in a master's program in public history at a nearby university in January, using my Smithsonian consulting work as the foundation for my thesis proposal. The application process felt surreal after 2 decades away from academic settings, but the admissions committee seemed genuinely excited about my unique access to primary source documents and ongoing preservation project. My thesis advisor was a professor who specialized in Underground Railroad history and nearly jumped out of her chair when I explained my consulting role with the letters. She scheduled weekly meetings to discuss my research direction and connected me with other faculty members working on related projects. Classes started in late January, and I found myself sitting in seminars with students half my age, taking notes and participating in discussions about historical methodology and archival research. 6 months after the settlement, my life looked completely different from anything I'd imagined back in February when Keith handed me divorce papers. I spent mornings in graduate classes learning research methods and historical theory, afternoons at the Historical Society working with Dorothy on the letter catalog, and evenings reading assigned texts or writing papers for my courses. Some days I collapsed into bed, exhausted from juggling multiple commitments, and wondered if I'd taken on too much too fast. But it was the good kind of tired that came from working toward something meaningful, instead of the hollow exhaustion I'd felt during my marriage, constantly giving everything to support Keith's ambitions, while my own potential withered from neglect. I ran into Rachel at the coffee shop near campus in March, someone I hadn't seen since before Keith's residency started. She was ordering a latte when I walked in, and her face lit up with genuine surprise. We grabbed a table by the window and talked for 2 hours, catching up on everything that happened since we'd lost touch 15 years ago. Rachel told me she'd tried reaching out a few times during my marriage, but I never responded, and she eventually assumed I didn't want to maintain the friendship. I apologized and explained how Keith's career had consumed everything, how I'd gradually stopped answering calls and texts from anyone who wasn't directly useful to his professional advancement. Rachel admitted she'd always thought Keith took advantage of me, but didn't know how to say it without sounding judgmental or interfering in my marriage. She mentioned running into Keith's mother once at a hospital fundraiser, and his mother had complained about how demanding Keith was, how nothing anyone did was ever good enough for him. The conversation felt like opening a window in a stuffy room, letting fresh air clear out years of isolation. Rachel introduced me to two other friends from our old group, women I'd completely lost contact with during the years I spent supporting Keith's ambitions. We started meeting for lunch every few weeks, and they were amazed by my transformation from the exhausted, anxious person they remembered into someone who actually had her own life and goals. One of them, Jennifer, confessed she'd attended Keith's hospital fundraisers a few times, and watched how he treated me in public, how he'd interrupt me mid-sentence or correct me in front of other people, and she'd wanted to shake me and tell me to leave him. But she worried I'd cut her off completely if she criticized my marriage, so she stayed silent and felt guilty about it for years. These conversations helped me understand how isolated I'd become during my marriage, how Keith had gradually cut me off from everyone who might have helped me see what was happening. The restoration ceremony at Belworth House took place in late April with over 200 people attending. Historians, preservationists, descendants of people who used the Underground Railroad, local officials and representatives from the Smithsonian Partnership all gathered on the property for the official announcement. Dorothy and I had worked for months preparing a catalog of the letters and documenting the house's history, creating a comprehensive record of its role in the Underground Railroad network. The Smithsonian representative asked me to speak about discovering the letters, and I stood at a podium set up on the front lawn feeling nervous, but also genuinely proud of what I'd helped preserve. I talked about finding the trunk in the attic, reading the letters for the first time, and realizing I'd stumbled onto something historically significant. Several descendants approached me afterward to thank me for preserving their family history, for making sure these stories wouldn't be lost. One woman showed me a photo of her great-great-grandfather, who had passed through this house on his journey north, and she started crying as she talked about finally having proof of his route to freedom. The ceremony felt like validation, that this fight with Keith had been worth it, that protecting this property mattered beyond just my personal financial security. Dorothy squeezed my hand during the speeches and whispered that I'd done something important, something that would matter to people for generations. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the ceremony with a photo of me standing in front of the house, and several colleagues from my graduate program texted congratulations. A year after the settlement, I was sitting in my small house near the Historical Society working on my thesis when I realized I'd built a life I actually wanted to live. I had graduate classes that challenged me intellectually, consulting work that felt meaningful, and a growing community of colleagues and friends who valued my contributions. The financial security from the settlement and property sale meant I could focus on my education and career development without constant worry about money. I'd published 2 papers about the Belworth letters in academic journals, presented at 3 conferences, and been invited to contribute to a book about Underground Railroad sites. My thesis advisor told me my work was genuinely advancing the field's understanding of the network in this region, and several universities had already expressed interest in hiring me after graduation. Keith's attempt to cheat me out of the property had ultimately freed me from a marriage where I was never valued, where my only purpose was supporting his ambitions, while my own potential were ignored. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, accepting an insulting settlement because I believed I had no other options and barely recognized her. That version of me had been so beaten down by years of emotional neglect that she couldn't imagine fighting back or demanding better treatment. The person I'd become over the past year knew her worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. I was building a life entirely my own, not in service to someone else's ambitions or career goals. The house Keith tried to dump on me became the foundation for my independence, providing both the financial resources and the professional opportunities I needed to start over. I'd never get back the 18 years I spent supporting his career, missing opportunities and sacrificing my own goals to make his life easier. But I was genuinely excited about the future I was creating now, about the work I was doing and the person I was becoming. My graduate advisor mentioned a tenure-track position opening up at a nearby university that would be perfect for my research focus, and I was planning to apply. Dorothy and I were discussing a joint project documenting other Underground Railroad sites in the region, potentially expanding the research beyond just Belworth House. I'd reconnected with old friends, made new ones through my academic work, and built a support system that actually supported me instead of draining my energy. Some mornings I woke up and had to remind myself this was really my life now, that I'd actually escaped the marriage that had trapped me for so long. Keith had tried to cheat me one last time on his way out, and instead he'd accidentally given me the key to my freedom. Okay, that's where we'll stop before I start rambling again. Seriously, though, thanks for hanging out till the end. It means a lot. Go drink some water or text someone you care about, yeah?